Hi, you may have heard of a book called The Trauma Cleaner, which details the life of a person who set up a business where they go into houses that are in a very bad state and clean them up. Maybe they've been the scene of a crime within the house, or they've been totally derelict. The inhabitants haven't cleaned for whatever reason, and the house is just filthy. So the trauma cleaner is someone who goes into the house and gets it absolutely spick and span. Well, this had me thinking about, I love the phrase, the trauma cleaner, and it had me thinking about the course and how it's a great analogy for what the course does. It goes into the mind, or using the principles, we go into the mind, and through the whole, with the help of the Holy Spirit and the memory of truth, we help to clear the mind of the trauma. Now, traditional therapy absolutely has its place, and there's no good in what we call spiritual bypassing, where we just think about metaphysical principles and meditate on that, if you like. We are one, we are pure, we are whole, we are innocent, all that kind of stuff. We are strong. But that can be used as a bypass for dealing with the pain associated with trauma. So, but there's a place for traditional therapy, absolutely. And that's often our first port of call when dealing with a very difficult past. And, it's a step that we needn't try to escape or jump over in order for healing. It can be really helpful to be in the presence of someone who can help us understand or alleviate the shame and the guilt that we feel associated with things from the past, particularly for those things that occurred to us in childhood. And as a child, we do take on a lot of responsibility for what happens to us and develop a self-concept associated with that, a shameful and guilty self-concept. And so regular therapy can really help with that. So that's a very important thing. The course or any spiritual system ideally shouldn't be used as a replacement for therapy, an adjunct or a next step. Yes. So now I'd like to read a little bit from the course's psychotherapy supplement, kind of about this matter. So I've got the old pamphlet, but you'll see in the new editions of the Course in Miracles from the Foundation for Inner Peace, it includes both the Song of Prayer pamphlet and this psychotherapy pamphlet, which it's just really, really worth getting. Now, so the first line in the introduction to a section called The Process of Psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is a process that changes the view of the self. At best, this new self is a more beneficent self-concept, so less shameful and less guilty. But psychotherapy can hardly be expected to establish reality. So a drawback of looking at traditional psychotherapy on its own to deal with your healing is that it's not in touch with what the Course would say is reality. It's certainly a world-based system, an important one, an important step, but world-based. And a good way of describing, I think, where it can leave us comes from the experience of author Jeanette Winterson, who you might be familiar. She was most famous for her book Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, I think is the title. And I'm going to read from a quote from an essay I wrote in this book, The Farthest Reaches of Inner Space. Just to explain, Jeanette had a very, very traumatic childhood. And when she was, I think it was about 47, she had a severe mental, breakdown. I'm not sure what the term they use now is, but it's probably not breakdown. Anyway, she had a very, very difficult time, and it was all that stuff from her childhood re-emerging, and with it was a real sense of shame. She said at the time she was seeing an image of a girl, so a vision, if you like, of a girl, and she was just like a swamp. She'd come out of a swamp. She was just dripping in miserable and dripping in slimy, swampy kind of material, which I think represents the self-concept she had developed. Even though now she was very famous and a successful writer, very, very well regarded, this was all coming up for her to deal with. After the process of psychoanalysis, I believe she had, these are some of her thoughts. Wounds, Jeanette said, don't go away. The best we can hope for is that they're not infected anymore, poisoning our entire system. We can work with the damaged place, seeing it as a constant reminder of where we've been, what we've gone through, and what we've brought back with us. We are, said Jeanette, known by these wounds. They can become a place of strength and possibility. Okay, so that's where therapy, traditional therapy, can lead us. And you look, it's better than the place it was before. However, it's not awakening from the dream, and it's not cleaning the mind totally. You know, it's like the Course says, at best, psychotherapy can replace a very awful, swamp creature like self-concept with a more beneficent one, a better one. But the Course offers us true liberation from the past, a true cleansing of the mind, so that we're not, as Jeanette says, known by the wound. We don't develop a special relationship to it. We're not identified by our past or by our wound, and we live in the ever present, which is the holy instant. So here is a quote about the holy instant, which I think also helps illuminate the radical transformation that the Course provides. There is no fear in the present when each instant stands clear and separated from the past without its shadow reaching out into the future. Each instant is clean, untarnished birth, and is a clean, untarnished birth in which the Son of God emerges from the past into the present, and the present extends forever. It is so beautiful and so clean and free of guilt that nothing but happiness is there. No darkness is remembered, and immortality and joy are now. So in line with this idea of the Course truly cleaning, truly being the trauma cleaner, getting that the room of our mind absolutely clean and clearing it of all the unforgiveness and the trauma, is reflected in a couple of lessons, I think, really well. The first of these is lesson 107. Truth will correct all errors in my mind, all errors in my mind. What can correct illusions but truth? And what are errors but illusions that remain unrecognized for what they are? Where truth has entered, errors disappear. They merely vanish, leaving not a trace by which to be remembered. And it's not so much that we have no memory of events or what have you, but the emotional charge around them are gone, and the need to recall them has shifted. A lot of our need to recall things is either to process them because they still need healing, or for our ego. It's like I think the Course calls it the grab bag of guilt, that the ego is afraid of peace, and so it will have us come up with some memory that still has a charge towards with it, so that we keep away from peace, from the memory of truth, just to keep the ego alive. Now, another lesson that I thought was very interesting is lesson 190. And why I find this lesson interesting is because it's the only place in the course that mentions the word hospital. Now, I was looking for a reference to the word hospital in the course because of a dream that I had had, in which I was standing in a hospital and someone was talking to me about the place of the course or the course's teachings in this hospital. And there was a room and it was labelled rest, as in calm, that kind of rest. And in it were people who I knew were ready to leave hospital. They had had all the therapy they needed from all the other therapists, and now they were in this room of rest. And the work of the course with these people was to help them. Ostensibly, it was like, to do some measurements, make sure they were okay to go back out in the world. But really what it was about being with them, reassuring them that everything was okay and helping them transition out of the hospital back into the world. And I found, that's why I went searching for the word hospital, and I found this line in the course in lesson 190. And would you deny a little corner of your mind its own inheritance? So it's talking about sickness, this part of the course, and sickness we could call an unforgiveness, and the feelings of shame and guilt associated with it, and anxiety, depression, all that associated with it. Would you deny a little corner of your mind its own inheritance, the inheritance of peace, and keep it as a hospital for pain, a sickly place where living things must come at last to die? So, wow, the mind as a hospital for pain. Do we want to keep the mind as a hospital for pain? Where the way I see that is where we are dealing with our pain without the Holy Spirit's help. So it still keeps us rooted to the world. And we leave a corner of our mind to ourselves, a secret place, which means a secret unforgiveness. We'll say, well, the Holy Spirit can help with all these other things, but not this one. I'm going to hold on to this one for a while. And it's only in a corner, so it's okay. So it won't affect the whole it won't affect my whole mind, but actually it does. You cannot hold a little corner off and it not pervade throughout your whole life and affect your sense of peace in every circumstance and in all situations. So when we're ready to let go of that little piece, that means we suddenly can enter into that room which had on it rest. That's where we're ready for the course and ready to really do its lessons and let go of shame and guilt entirely, which means no longer holding a little corner away which we won't offer up to forgiveness, which means a person we won't forgive, a circumstance we won't forgive, could be someone else, could be we won't forgive ourselves. The Course reminds us it's the same mistake, because both of those, holding on to guilt in someone else or ourselves, is saying the separation happened and that the impossible happened. How could a part of oneness, a part of love, be anything other than loving? And it's not that we hear that, or the body is that part of oneness, but our mind, there is a part of our mind, the true us, that is always loving and always a part of that oneness. So when we're ready to open our mind up to the healing of the Holy Spirit in all circumstances, at all times, we enter that room where we're ready to go back into the world from that peaceful place. And now I'd like to read a paragraph or a bit from lesson 107 again. So going back to truth will correct all errors in my mind, which I think really illustrates that transition. Okay, so I'm reading from paragraph 9 in Truth Will Correct All Errors in My Mind. Truth will correct all errors in your mind, which tell you you could be apart from Him, Him with a capital H, meaning God. You speak to Him today and make your pledge to let His function be fulfilled through you, His function being forgiveness. To share His function is to share His joy. His confidence is with you as you say, truth will correct all errors in my mind, and I will rest in Him who is myself, capital S, self. Now this bit, think of the waiting room in the hospital, or not, the rest room in the hospital. Then let Him lead you gently to the truth, which will envelop you and give you peace so deep and tranquil that you will return to the familiar world reluctantly. And yet you will be glad to look again upon this world, for you will bring with you the promise of the changes which the truth that goes with you will carry to the world. So, trauma, there is certainly a place for therapy, and I don't know if there's anybody who gets to go into the Course in Miracles in depth who hasn't either undergone some type of therapy uh, or is undergoing it as they're working with the Course in Miracles, or gets into it after they've started working the Course in Miracles, and that is absolutely fine. It's all part of letting go of the shame and guilt at different levels. So first, we often need to tap into the fact that we have shame and guilt, and then we need to become aware of where that comes from, who we're holding responsible for that. And it's not until we can do those, actually become aware of those things, that we can start to get over their secret, beyond their secret influence. So this reminds me of another part of the psychotherapy pamphlet, which I'll read. No one in this world escapes fear, but everyone can reconsider its causes and learn to evaluate them correctly. God has given everyone a teacher whose wisdom and help far exceed whatever contributions an earthly therapist can provide. Yet there are times and situations in which an earthly patient-therapist relationship becomes the means through which he offers his greatest gifts to both. So the best therapy, or most potent therapy, that occurs in the traditional setup of therapist and client, happens when the Holy Spirit, whether the therapist or patient thinks about the Holy Spirit or believes in God, that's kind of irrelevant to what the Course is talking about here. The pamphlet says that when the therapist remembers not to judge their patient for whatever their patient, however their patient is, or whatever they're saying, then healing comes to both of them. So the therapist can see in the patient, in their judgments of the patient, all that is unforgiven in themselves, and in sharing a common goal of that person's healing, if the therapist can also accept that they need healing as well, recognize their transference onto the client, and or their projections rather onto the client, and take them back and work with their own forgiveness, there can be a healing if they're both open-minded enough for the Holy Spirit to come through. You can find that they're a perfect fit. Usually the therapist will be aware of how what the client is talking about is matching something in their own past, but the client, unfortunately, will not necessarily be aware of how that is working out with, of the match that is occurring with the therapist. But nonetheless, nothing happens by coincidence, and there will be some match. And if both people somehow are open to accepting responsibility for whatever judgments are occurring within their mind, the Holy Spirit can then work through that scenario for healing for both of them. But the Course has a larger aim. Its aim is awakening from the dream of separation. And so it talks about the dream of separation and how the shame and the guilt and the grievances we have associated with our lives as we perceive them in this world are really a reflection and a cover for another dream of shame, guilt, abandonment, retribution, all of that. And that dream, it's about our relationship to God. So it teaches us how our earthly relationships and our focus on them as the source of all our pain that's actually a cover for there being another dream behind that one. So the dream behind the dream, the shame and guilt behind the shame and guilt, and the whole idea of projection is involved in that. So the thing is this: if we really want to clean the mind and really heal the trauma, then we do need to address the dream behind the dream. And that is what the Course's process of forgiveness helps us do without, what was that phrase again? Without spiritual bypassing, because it does involve really looking at our reactions to people and processing the projection, owning the projection. And look, there's a lot more involved, but yeah, the Course I think is a really good way of, well, it's why it's called a psycho-spiritual text, because it doesn't skip steps. It doesn't want you to skip steps. It wants you to work through all the things that you believe are the source of your pain and suffering and work through them with the aid of that inner teacher that has another perspective, a perspective that addresses that dream behind the dream. I hope you found this discussion helpful. I highly recommend having a look at and a read through lesson 107, even if you've read through it before. Have a read through it sometime after watching this video, and I think it'll give you a real sense of the absolute cleaning process that the Course provides. And yeah, providing that nice space within our mind for the Holy Spirit's love and light to enter and fill. Thanks for watching.